The first sign that my fiancée had already made a decision about us was the fact that she cleaned out the bathroom before she told me. Not her clothes, not the closet, the bathroom. I came home from work on a Thursday and noticed her toothbrush was gone, along with a little glass jar where she kept cotton pads and about 14 skincare products I couldn't identify if my life depended on it. Her towel wasn't hanging behind the door either. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, looking at the empty counter. Then I walked into the kitchen and found Emily sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. She looked up and said, "Can you sit down?" That's never followed by anything useful. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 7 months. Our wedding was supposed to be the following May. I was 31. She was 28. We lived outside Denver in a 2-bedroom townhouse we'd rented because we were supposedly saving aggressively for a house after the wedding. We'd already toured neighborhoods. She had a Pinterest folder full of kitchens, so when she said, "I don't think I can marry you," my brain didn't immediately catch up. I actually looked toward the hallway, like there might be somebody else in the house who could explain what she'd just said. Emily rubbed her thumb against the side of the mug. "There's someone else." That did it. I sat down. She quickly added that she hadn't cheated on me. At least not physically. His name was Ryan. She'd met him at the climbing gym she'd joined in January. I'd encouraged her to join, which became one of those details my brain enjoyed replaying at 3 a.m. Emily had always hated regular gyms. She said running on treadmills made her feel like a hamster with student loans. A coworker convinced her to try climbing, and she loved it. At first, I loved that she loved it. She went 2 nights a week, then 3. Sometimes she'd stay after with a group and get tacos or beers. Ryan was part of that group. Apparently, they started talking because he worked in commercial real estate and Emily was an interior designer. They had overlapping interests, buildings, renovations, neighborhoods, that kind of thing. I asked how long she'd had feelings for him. She said she didn't know. I waited. She looked down. "A few weeks." That meant longer than a few weeks. I asked if he'd told her he liked her. She nodded. Apparently, 2 days earlier, Ryan had asked if she'd ever considered what her life would look like if she weren't engaged. That was a bold question to ask another man's fiancée. Emily didn't tell him to go to hell. Instead, she came home and reconsidered our entire relationship. She told me she'd realized she'd been going through the motions. I asked what that meant. She said she couldn't explain it. We'd booked a photographer 6 days earlier. I'd spent the previous Sunday comparing catering packages with her mother. Going through the motions apparently required considerable administrative effort. I asked the question I probably shouldn't have asked. "Are you leaving me for him?" She shook her head immediately. "No, I'm leaving because something is wrong between us." "What's wrong?" "I don't know." "So you're ending a 4-year relationship because a guy at the gym asked you a question?" She flinched. "That's not fair." Maybe it wasn't, but it was accurate. She started crying. I didn't. Not because I was handling it particularly well. I think my brain had temporarily unplugged itself. She told me she'd been feeling disconnected for months. She said I'd been working too much. She said we felt more like roommates sometimes. Some of that was true. I managed construction projects for a regional developer. The previous 6 months had been brutal. I'd leave before 7 some mornings and come home after 6. But we'd talked about that. More importantly, I thought we'd solved it. We'd started doing Wednesday dinners with no phones. We'd gone to Santa Fe for a long weekend in February. 2 weeks earlier, she'd been sending me Airbnb listings for our honeymoon. Now she was explaining that she'd been unhappy for months. I asked why she'd agreed to marry me. She didn't answer. That's when I noticed 2 suitcases beside the stairs. Apparently, she'd already arranged to stay with her friend Lauren. There wasn't going to be a discussion where we slept separately for a week and figured things out. She was gone. I asked if Ryan knew she was ending the engagement. She said yes. That answer hurt more than I expected. Some guy I had never met knew my engagement was ending before I did. Emily left about 20 minutes later. She hugged me at the door. I didn't hug her back. Not because I was trying to punish her. I genuinely didn't know where to put my arms. After she drove away, I walked into the kitchen and noticed she'd left her coffee on the table, still warm. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. People say heartbreak feels emotional. Mine was annoyingly physical. My heart rate stayed high enough that my Garmin kept congratulating me for apparently exercising while sitting at my desk. Food tasted like drywall. I'd order something, take 4 bites, then put it in the refrigerator, where it would remain until I threw it away. At work, I reread the same emails 3 times. My boss, Mark, finally closed my office door Monday morning and asked if I was okay. I told him the engagement had ended. He didn't give me a speech. He just said, "Take Friday off." That nearly made me cry, which was irritating because I'd managed not to cry during the actual breakup. I told my brother Luke that night. His first question was whether she'd slept with Ryan. I told him she said no. Luke went quiet. "What?" "Nothing." "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you don't say what you're obviously thinking." He sighed. "She's going to date him." I knew that. I just didn't want anyone saying it out loud. Luke told me not to contact her unless it involved the lease, deposits, wedding vendors, or returning belongings. No checking in, no asking how she was doing, no trying to convince her we'd been good together. "She knows you," he said. She had 4 years of information. That sentence stayed with me. Emily had 4 years of information. She knew exactly who I was, and she still walked out. I didn't need to prepare a better presentation. 3 days later, she texted, asking when she could pick up the rest of her clothes. I told her Saturday morning. Then she wrote, "I hope eventually you understand I didn't do this to hurt you." I stared at that for a while. Finally, I typed, "I don't think hurting me was the goal. It was just a cost you decided was acceptable." I almost deleted it. Then I sent it. She didn't respond. Saturday, she came with Lauren. I put Emily's boxes in the garage so she wouldn't have to walk through the house. She looked thinner already, although I'm aware that's probably not physiologically possible in 9 days. She asked if I wanted to talk. I said there wasn't much left to discuss. Then she surprised me. She said, "Ryan and I aren't together." I hadn't asked. That was how I knew they probably would be soon. For the first month, I operated like somebody had given me a checklist for being a functioning adult. Go to work, eat something, lift weights, call somebody, don't text Emily. Sleep if possible, repeat. The last one was the weakest part of the program. I started waking around 3:40 every morning with my mind fully alert for no reason. I'd lie there doing calculations about things that didn't matter. How much we'd lost on wedding deposits. How many nights she'd probably stayed late at the climbing gym while I was at home. Whether she'd compared me to Ryan before or after I proposed. That kind of productive thinking, the wedding cancellation itself, became a second job. The venue kept half the deposit. The photographer refunded almost everything. Our caterer somehow had the emotional warmth of an undertaker and the contract enforcement skills of the IRS. My mother offered to make the calls. I told her no. I needed to do them. There was something useful about turning a wreck into paperwork. Emily and I communicated almost entirely through email. She'd taken her clothes, books, desk, and most of the kitchen things that had belonged to her before we moved in. She left the couch because neither of us actually wanted it. I still have that couch. It's ugly. But at this point, we've suffered together. About 6 weeks after the breakup, one of my friends sent me a screenshot. I wish he hadn't, although I understand why he did. Emily had posted a picture from a brewery. Ryan was in it, not touching her, nothing obvious. There were 5 people at the table, but he was sitting next to her. I zoomed in like an idiot. He looked normal. That bothered me more than if he'd looked like some cartoon version of the guy who steals your fiancée. He wasn't ridiculously handsome. He wasn't 22 with abs visible through his shirt. He looked about 35 maybe. Short brown hair, beard, Patagonia vest. Basically, Colorado had manufactured him in bulk. I asked my friend not to send me anything else. 2 weeks later, Emily's mother called. I almost didn't answer. I'd always liked Denise. She'd treated me well from the first Thanksgiving I spent with their family. She asked how I was doing. I said better. Then she started crying. That immediately told me the call wasn't really about me. She said Emily was confused. I leaned against the kitchen counter. About what? Everything. I knew what was coming. Denise said Emily had started seeing Ryan. Apparently it happened a little while after we broke up. I didn't ask how little. She said she wanted me to know Emily hadn't cheated. I said, Denise, I don't think this conversation is helping either one of us. She apologized. Then she said something strange. I think she expected you to fight harder. That got my attention. What does that mean? Denise hesitated. She said Emily had apparently been surprised by how quickly I'd accepted the breakup. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. What was I supposed to do? I don't know. She packed before she told me. I know. She had somewhere else to stay. She'd already told Ryan. What exactly was the opening for negotiation? Denise didn't have an answer. Neither did I. After that call, something shifted. I'd spent weeks imagining Emily as completely certain. She'd discovered some missing piece of herself, made a painful adult decision, and moved forward. Now I started wondering if she'd expected a different scene. Maybe she thought I'd bargain. Maybe she'd imagined me promising to change jobs, work less, plan more dates, join the climbing gym, become whoever she needed. I could have done some of those things. That was the uncomfortable part. But I didn't want a relationship where somebody had to threaten to leave before telling me what was wrong. And I definitely didn't want to compete with a stranger for a woman wearing my engagement ring. I gave the ring to my sister to hold because selling it immediately felt weird, and keeping it in my dresser felt worse. Then I changed my routine. I stopped going straight home after work. On Tuesdays, Luke and I played indoor soccer with some guys from his office. I hadn't played since college. The first night I discovered my brain still remembered what to do while my lungs strongly disagreed. Thursday nights I started taking a cooking class at a place downtown. That wasn't some eat, pray, love reinvention. I was living alone and had realized most of my adult meals involved a grill, scrambled eggs, or Chipotle. The instructor was a 50-something woman named Carla, who insulted our knife technique like she'd been personally betrayed by it. I loved the class. I met people who knew nothing about Emily. That mattered. Around month 3, my sleep went back to normal. Not all at once. I just realized one morning that I'd slept until my alarm. Then it happened again. Food started tasting like food. My watch stopped warning me that I was apparently being hunted while answering emails. I even went on a date. Her name was Madison. She was a nurse my sister knew, We got drinks. She was smart, funny, attractive, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. I went home afterward and felt exhausted. So I texted her the next morning and said I wasn't ready. She replied, I kind of figured. Fair. I stopped dating again. The biggest change happened in May, about 4 months after Emily left. My company sent me to Boise for a project kickoff. Normally, I would have flown home Friday night. Instead, I rented a car and spent the weekend driving around Idaho alone. No dramatic revelation occurred. I ate a burger in a diner, walked around a lake, bought an overpriced fleece because I hadn't packed for mountain weather. But Sunday morning, I sat outside a coffee shop and realized I'd gone almost an entire day without thinking about Emily. That felt significant. Then, 3 weeks later, my phone rang while I was making dinner. I didn't recognize the number. I answered because contractors call me from random numbers all the time. There was silence. Then I heard Emily say my name. I almost dropped the pan. She said, Please don't hang up. I turned off the stove. Apparently, she'd called from her office phone because I had blocked her personal number. I hadn't even remembered blocking it. She asked if we could talk. I told her we were talking. Then she said Ryan had moved out. That was interesting because I hadn't known they'd moved in together. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Emily filled the silence. She told me she and Ryan had moved in together in April. It had lasted 6 weeks. I remember looking at the chicken I'd been cooking and thinking there was probably some metaphor available, but I was too tired to find it. She said things had been intense between them at first. That word made me uncomfortable. She must have heard it in my silence because she quickly said, I know you don't want details. Correct. She explained that Ryan was different once they were actually together. He liked going out constantly. He spent money like his credit card company had promised not to collect. He was jealous about her male coworkers. He also apparently enjoyed flirting with women in front of her, and then accusing her of being insecure if she noticed. None of this made me happy. That's something I want to be clear about. I'd imagined this call before. Not literally, but in that stupid private way people do after being left. Maybe she'd realized she'd made a mistake. Maybe the exciting new guy would turn out to be ordinary. Maybe she'd come back, and I'd deliver one perfect sentence before walking away. Real life was less satisfying. Emily just sounded tired. She said she'd started thinking about us again. I asked why. She said, Because I miss you. I waited. And I realized what I gave up. There it was. I asked if Ryan had broken up with her. She said it was mutual. I asked who moved out. She said he did. I asked who first said the relationship wasn't working. Long pause. Ryan. So, not entirely mutual. She became defensive. It was ending anyway. Okay. You don't have to make me feel worse. I'm not trying to. It sounds like you are. I rubbed my forehead. This was already familiar. Not because we'd fought constantly when we were together. We hadn't. But Emily had always hated conversations where she felt she was being judged. She'd focus on the tone before the actual subject. I asked what she wanted from me. She said she wanted to meet. Coffee, nothing dramatic. She wanted to apologize properly. I told her she could apologize on the phone. Another silence. Then she said, I want another chance. There are moments where your past self and present self disagree in real time. The version of me from February would have driven across town barefoot if she'd said that. The version standing in my kitchen in June just felt uneasy. I asked her why she wanted me now. She said she'd always wanted me. I told her that couldn't be true in any practical sense. She started crying. She said she'd been overwhelmed before the wedding. she'd been scared about making one choice for the rest of her life. Ryan had made her feel spontaneous, desired, interesting. I appreciated the answer because it was probably the first honest explanation I'd gotten. She said our life had started to feel predetermined. Marriage, house, kids, work, Costco on Sundays. I almost pointed out that she loved Costco, but it seemed unhelpful. Ryan represented something outside the plan. She said she confused excitement with compatibility. That sentence sounded like something she'd spent time thinking about. I asked whether she'd slept with him before ending our engagement. She said no. Then she added, "Not technically." I actually laughed. What does not technically mean? They had kissed. Once. 3 days before she ended things with me. She'd left that out. I walked to the sink and stared out the window. There are details you suspect, and details you know. The distance between those two can be surprisingly large. Emily said she'd stopped it immediately. She went home. She felt horrible. Then Ryan texted her the next day and asked what she actually wanted. 2 days later, she ended our engagement. "So you cheated?" "It was one kiss." "That's generally enough." "I know," she apologized. Then she said she hadn't told me because she knew I'd focus on the kiss instead of the problems we'd had. That sounded dangerously close to blaming me for not knowing she'd cheated. I told her that. She got quiet. Then she said, "You're right." That surprised me. She told me there was more. Of course there was. Ryan hadn't randomly asked whether she'd considered life without me. They'd been talking about our relationship for weeks. Emily had told him I worked too much, that we weren't having sex as often, that she worried marriage would turn us into her parents, that I was dependable, but sometimes difficult to read. Ryan listened. Ryan understood. Ryan apparently also had excellent timing. I asked whether she'd complained about me to him while coming home and telling me everything was fine. She said yes. That bothered me more than the kiss. She'd given someone else access to problems I hadn't been allowed to know existed. Ryan wasn't just standing outside our relationship waiting for an opportunity. She'd opened a door. I told her I couldn't meet. She asked me not to decide immediately. I said I'd already decided. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I know you think I came back because Ryan left." "That's part of it." "It's not." "If things were great with him, would you be calling me tonight?" She didn't answer. That was enough. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. I meant it. I also told her I couldn't trust her with the boring parts of a relationship. She asked what that meant. I said anybody can love somebody during vacations, engagement photos, new restaurants, sex, and good news. Most of a marriage isn't that. It's grocery lists, bad weeks at work, somebody getting sick, laundry, mortgages, family problems, and occasionally eating cereal for dinner because nobody wants to cook. She'd reached the ordinary part with me and interpreted it as evidence something was wrong. Then she'd reached the ordinary part with Ryan and suddenly remembered ordinary hadn't been so bad. I didn't want to spend the next decade wondering who she'd meet the next time our life felt predictable. Emily cried quietly. I didn't enjoy hearing it. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said no. Before we hung up, she said, "I really did love you." I told her I believed her. That's probably what made the whole thing worse. Sometimes people love you and still make decisions you can't build a life around. I blocked the office number after we hung up. Then I burned the chicken. I expected that phone call to set me back. For a few days it did. Not because I wanted Emily back, because now I had answers. And answers create their own problems. Before the call, there was still a version of events where she'd simply fallen out of love with me. Painful, but clean. Now I knew she'd been discussing our relationship with another man, kissed him, ended our engagement, dated him almost immediately, moved in with him, and called me once that relationship collapsed. That was harder to make pretty. The strange thing was, it also made letting go easier. I stopped wondering whether I should have done more. Yes, I'd worked too much. Yes, I'd gotten comfortable. Yes, there were nights where Emily wanted to talk, and I was half reading emails on my phone. I wasn't going to rewrite myself into some perfect abandoned fiancé. I had things to improve, but none of those things required secrecy. If she'd come to me in January and said, "I'm scared we're turning into roommates," I would have listened. Maybe we'd still have failed, but at least we would have failed, honestly. Instead, she started building emotional intimacy with somebody else while I was pricing wedding chairs. I couldn't fix a conversation I was never invited into. A week after the call, I sold the engagement ring. I expected that to feel dramatic. It didn't. The jeweler inspected it, typed numbers into a calculator, and offered me an amount that would have been insulting if I hadn't already learned that engagement rings have roughly the resale value of customized bowling balls. I took the money. Then I used part of it to book a trip to Vancouver with Luke. When I told him where the money came from, he said, "Romance isn't dead. It just became 2 plane tickets. That's why he's my favorite brother." He's also my only brother, but still. By August, I'd been single for almost 7 months. My life looked different. Not movie different. I didn't suddenly have 6-pack abs, a Porsche, and a mysterious woman waiting at a rooftop bar. I still drove the same Tacoma. I still worked too much occasionally. The ugly couch remained. But I had people around me again. I'd gotten close with 2 guys from indoor soccer. Carla from my cooking class somehow convinced 4 of us to sign up for an amateur chili competition where we finished second to last. The team below us used canned beans and somehow burned them, so I don't count that as a victory. I started seeing Madison again, too. The nurse from the date I'd ended after 1 drink. We ran into each other at my sister's birthday. She asked whether I was still emotionally unavailable. I said, "Less efficiently." She laughed. We started talking. This time I didn't rush it. I told her the whole engagement story by the 3rd date. Not every detail. Just enough that she understood why I moved slowly. She didn't try to fix it. She said, "Makes sense." That was nice. In September, Emily emailed me. It went to spam, but I found it while searching for a Home Depot receipt. The universe has a sense of humor. The email wasn't dramatic. She said she'd respected my request for no contact and wouldn't write again. She'd started counseling. She'd moved into her own apartment. She apologized for the kiss and for making me feel like the relationship had failed because I hadn't been exciting enough. Then she wrote something I hadn't expected. She said she'd realized she'd created a version of me in her head where I was the obstacle preventing her from feeling alive. Once I was gone, she discovered she still had the same restlessness. Ryan hadn't caused it. I hadn't caused it. She said she didn't know what did. For a few minutes, I considered responding. I even typed, "I hope you figure it out." Then I deleted it. Not because I hated her. I didn't. I just didn't want to reopen a door because somebody had knocked politely. That night, Madison came over. We made dinner. She chopped onions while I worked on the sauce. At one point, she looked toward the living room and said, "That couch is terrible." I told her it had sentimental value. She looked confused. I said, "We've survived some things." She laughed and told me the couch still had to go. A month later, it did. That probably sounds like a pointless detail. It wasn't. For most of that year, I'd measured progress in big things. First week without contacting Emily. First full night of sleep. First trip alone. First date. Selling the ring. Turning her down. But eventually progress became smaller. Throwing away a mug she'd bought me that I didn't even like. Changing the emergency contact at my doctor's office. Realizing I couldn't remember Ryan's last name. Going through an entire Sunday without noticing it had once been the day Emily and I grocery shopped together. One afternoon, I found our wedding invitation sample in a desk drawer. Our names were printed together in dark green lettering. May 16th. We'd spent 2 hours picking the font. I looked at it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I put it through the shredder. No ceremony, no sadness, just paper. About a year after the breakup, Emily's mother sent me a Christmas card. I don't think Emily knew. Denise wrote that she hoped I was doing well, and that she'd always thought highly of me. I sent one back. Nothing more. I eventually heard through mutual friends that Emily was dating someone new. Not Ryan. Apparently she'd quit the climbing gym too. When my friend started giving me details, I stopped him. I realized I genuinely didn't want to know. That was probably the moment I understood I was finished with it, not healed in some perfect way. I still notice certain things. If someone suddenly starts hiding their phone, my brain pays attention. When a relationship gets comfortable, part of me wonders whether comfortable is becoming dangerous. I'm working on that. But I also learned something useful. For months after Emily left, I thought the worst thing she'd done was choose another man. It wasn't. The worst thing was making decisions about our relationship without me, while continuing to let me believe we were building the same future. Ryan was just the evidence. The real problem had started earlier. She stopped talking to me and started talking around me. By the time she sat at our kitchen table, removed her things from the bathroom, and told me she wasn't sure she could marry me. Most of the actual breakup had already happened somewhere I couldn't see. I just happened to be the last person informed. Madison and I have been together a little over a year now. We're not engaged. I'm not in a hurry. Neither is she. A few months ago, she told me she felt like I was disappearing into work again. The old version of me probably would have said the project would calm down soon. Instead, I closed my laptop. We talked for an hour. Nothing terrible was happening. She wasn't leaving. There wasn't another guy. She just missed me. It was almost disappointingly simple. Afterward, we ordered Thai food and watched half a movie before she fell asleep on the replacement couch. I sat there for a while thinking about how different that conversation was from the one I'd never gotten to have with Emily. Then I realized I didn't want to compare them, so I stopped. That's probably the best update I can give. For a long time, I wanted the ending to be Emily regretting what she'd done. She did. It didn't fix anything. Then I wanted the ending to be me becoming so successful and happy that she somehow heard about it. That stopped mattering too. The actual ending is much less impressive. I sleep normally. I eat normally. My resting heart rate is normal. I go to work. I see friends. I cook reasonably edible food. I'm dating someone I like. And if my phone rings from a number I don't recognize, I answer it without wondering whether it's her. I didn't get my old life back. I don't want it back anymore.